Lieutenant Frank Rogers never expected to become humanity's ambassador to the stars. Yet here he was, standing before beings that had lived for thousands of years, about to do something incredibly stupid. The day had started normally enough. Earth's first official meeting with the Galactic Federation was going according to protocol until their ship, the U.S. Dauntless, experienced a sudden power failure mid-conference. The alien delegates, particularly the tall, luminous beings called Eternals, watched with quiet curiosity as the humans scrambled to fix the problem. "Our engineers need at least 6 hours," Commander Walsh whispered to Frank. "The main reactor coupling is completely fried." The Eternal representative, Zorix, tilted his elongated head. "Perhaps we should reschedule for next cycle. Our delegation can return in what you would call 14 Earth days." Frank looked at the disappointed faces of his crew. They had worked too hard for this moment. The diplomatic team, including Dr. Olivia Grant and Major Dwayne Coleman, had prepared for months. "Sir," Frank said, stepping forward, "with all due respect, I think I can fix this." He turned to his friend Greg Peterson. "Hold my coffee, would you?" Greg's eyes widened as he took the mug. "Frank, what are you?" But Frank was already moving toward the exposed panel, unfastening his uniform jacket. He knelt down, examining the burned-out coupling. "Is your technician authorized for this procedure?" asked another alien, a crystalline being called a Zendari. Dr. Olivia Grant stepped forward smoothly. "Lieutenant Rogers has specialized training." This was technically true. Frank had grown up fixing farm equipment in Nebraska before joining the Navy. The alien technology was different, but broken was broken. "I just need to bypass this section and reroute power through the secondary systems," Frank muttered, pulling tools from a nearby kit. The Eternals watched with increasing alarm as Frank proceeded to modify their sacred technology with what appeared to be reckless abandon. One particularly ancient Eternal named Eliorix actually took several steps back when Frank pulled out a pocket knife. "Is he improvising?" Zorix asked, the concept clearly disturbing. "Humans excel at adaptation," Major Coleman explained proudly. For 20 tense minutes, Frank worked while explaining his process to the increasingly fascinated aliens. He connected circuits that weren't meant to be connected, bypassed safety systems, and at one point used a piece of his own uniform button as a temporary conductor. "That should do it," Frank finally said, standing up and wiping grease from his hands. "Try it now." When he pressed the activation sequence, the lights immediately hummed back to life. The conference room filled with the soft blue glow of restored power. The aliens stared in stunned silence. "That's impossible," whispered Zorix. "The ZC coupling cannot function without the primary matrix. Our engineers designed the system with triple redundancies specifically to prevent such modifications." Frank shrugged. "Sometimes you just need to look at a problem differently." Later that evening, as the diplomatic reception continued with renewed energy, Dr. Grant cornered Frank by the refreshment table. "You've made quite an impression," she said, nodding toward a group of Eternals who were discussing him, while occasionally glancing his way. "They'd been around for thousands of years. They don't improvise because they've had time to perfect everything. Their way works for them, I guess," Frank replied. "But sometimes you need to take chances." Across the room, Greg was explaining the phrase "hold my beer" to a confused alien diplomat. "It's what humans say before doing something potentially unwise but impressive," he explained. "And this is good?" asked the bewildered alien. Before Greg could answer, alarms began blaring. The ship's communication system activated. "Attention all personnel. Unknown space anomaly detected. Collision course. Impact in 10 minutes." The alien delegates began a calm, orderly evacuation procedure that would take approximately 15 minutes to complete. Frank looked at the nearby display showing the approaching anomaly, then at his crewmates. A slow smile spread across his face. "Dr. Grant, Major Coleman," he said, reaching for his uniform jacket. I think I have an idea. He handed his drink to a nearby Eternal. Hold my beer, would you? The immortal being looked down at the glass with sudden apprehension, a feeling it hadn't experienced in over 2,000 years. Things were about to get interesting. The space anomaly grew larger on the view screen as Frank rushed to the ship's control room. Behind him followed Dr. Grant, Major Coleman, and a reluctant group of alien representatives who seemed both curious and terrified. "What exactly do you plan to do?" asked Zorix, the tall Eternal whose silver eyes reflected genuine concern. "Our protocols clearly state that evacuation is the only safe response." Frank slid into the pilot's seat and started pressing buttons. "With all due respect, there's no time for evacuation. We need to move the ship out of the way." "Impossible," said a crystalline Centauri. "The engines are still offline from the earlier malfunction." Lisa Martinez, the ship's engineer who had been quietly working in the corner, looked up. "Not all of them." All eyes turned to her. Lisa was known for breaking rules and finding solutions where others saw none. "The maneuvering thrusters still work," she explained, moving to stand beside Frank. "Not enough for proper flight, but maybe enough to dodge." Frank nodded. "Exactly what I was thinking." The aliens exchanged worried glances. In their thousands of years of space travel, they had established careful protocols for every situation. Improvisation was foreign to them, dangerous even. "This is highly irregular," Zorix said. "The thrusters were not designed for evasive maneuvers of this magnitude." "Guys," Frank said, not looking up as his fingers flew across the controls, "sometimes you've got to work with what you have." Lisa slid into the seat next to him. "I can reroute auxiliary power to boost the thrusters, but it'll burn them out completely." "One-time use only." Frank nodded. "That's all we need." Dr. Grant watched with fascination as the two humans worked in perfect sync, breaking at least a dozen safety protocols that had been carefully explained during their orientation. The aliens, particularly the Eternals, seemed physically uncomfortable witnessing such recklessness. "The anomaly will reach us in 3 minutes," announced the ship's computer. Frank looked at the trajectory calculations and frowned. "Even with boosted thrusters, we can't move far enough away in time." The room fell silent until Major Coleman spoke up. "What if we don't move away? What if we move toward it?" Everyone stared at him. "Hear me out," Coleman continued. "That thing is moving fast, but it's following a predictable path. If we move toward it at an angle, we could slingshot around it using its own gravitational pull." The Eternal Elder, Eliorix, actually took a step back. "That is madness. The calculations would need to be precise to the 1,000th decimal." Frank and Lisa looked at each other, slow grins spreading across their faces. "I can eyeball it," Frank said. "And I can give you the thrust you need," Lisa added. Before the aliens could protest further, they were in motion. Frank's hands moved across the controls while Lisa rewired systems, occasionally sending sparks flying from the console. "Impact in 1 minute," warned the computer. "Ready on thrusters," Lisa called. "Plotting intercept course," Frank responded. The aliens watched in horror as Frank deliberately steered the ship toward the swirling anomaly. It grew larger on the screen, a massive spiral of energy that could tear their ship apart. "This defies all logic," whispered Zorix. "Hold on to something," Frank called out. The ship lurched forward, accelerating toward the anomaly. At the last possible moment, Frank adjusted their angle. The ship shuddered violently as they skimmed the outer edge of the phenomenon. Alarms blared, lights flickered, and several systems overloaded. For 3 terrifying seconds, the ship was caught in the gravitational pull of the anomaly. Then suddenly, they were propelled clear, shooting away at tremendous speed. Silence fell over the control room as the anomaly disappeared behind them. The emergency lights cast an eerie red glow over the stunned faces of the crew and visitors. "Systems report," Frank finally said. Lisa checked her readings. Thrusters completely burnt out. Main engines still offline. But we're alive. Zorik stepped forward, his tall frame slightly stooped as if aged by the experience. In all my 4,000 years, I have never witnessed such recklessness or such effectiveness. Frank leaned back in his chair, exchanging a triumphant look with Lisa and Coleman. That, Dr. Grant explained to the bewildered aliens, was humans saying, "Hold my beer" in action. Word of the incident spread quickly. Within hours, the story had reached the Galactic Federation headquarters. The humans had done the impossible not through advanced technology or careful planning, but through sheer audacity. The next morning, unexpectedly, an invitation arrived. The invitation was printed on a material that seemed to shimmer and shift like liquid metal. Frank turned it over in his hands while Dr. Grant, Lisa, and Major Coleman peered over his shoulders. The Galactic Tournament of Skills, Frank read aloud, held once every 100 years. And they want us to participate. Dr. Grant nodded slowly. This is unprecedented. New species are usually observed for at least a decade before receiving an invitation. They must have been impressed by our handling of the anomaly, Coleman said. Lisa grinned. Or they want to see what other crazy stuff we'll do. The tournament was scheduled to begin in 3 days on the Federation's Central Station, a massive structure orbiting a distant star. When they arrived, the human team was greeted by stares and whispers. Word had spread about the "Hold my beer" species. The competitors are gathering in the main hall. Their guide, a blue-skinned being named Krell, informed them. The challenges will be explained there. The main hall was enormous, filled with hundreds of different alien species. Some floated in bubbles of special atmosphere, others towered 3 times human height, and some were so small they needed hovering platforms to be seen. Frank and his team found spots near the back, feeling out of place among these advanced beings. A hush fell over the crowd as an ancient Eternal took the center stage. It was Eliorix, the elder who had witnessed their space anomaly escape. "Welcome to the 47th Galactic Tournament of Skills," his voice echoed. For 12,000 years, this event has celebrated innovation and ability across our united species. His silver eyes seemed to find the humans in the crowd. This year, we welcome our newest members, humans from the planet Earth. Murmurs spread through the audience. Frank noticed many aliens turning to look at them, with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. The tournament consists of 7 challenges, testing intellect, technology, adaptability, and courage. Eliorix continued. The final challenge, as always, is the impossible course. A hologram appeared above the stage, showing a dense asteroid field with shifting, unpredictable patterns. Strange energy fields pulsed between the rocks, and in the center sat a small planet-like object. No team has successfully navigated the impossible course in the last 12 millennia, Eliorix announced. Many have tried. Some did not return. Lisa leaned forward, eyes wide with excitement. Look at those gravitational patterns. They're incredible. A tall, insect-like alien next to them made a clicking sound. Your species should avoid the final challenge. With your primitive technology, it would be suicide. Frank smiled politely. Thanks for the concern. The first 6 challenges began over the next 2 days. To everyone's surprise, the humans performed well. They weren't the most technologically advanced, but their creativity and willingness to take risks put them ahead of many older species. Lisa dominated the engineering challenge, rewiring an alien power system in ways its designers never imagined. Major Coleman excelled in tactical simulations, using unpredictable strategies that confused opponents used to logical patterns. Dr. Grant's understanding of diverse cultures helped them solve complex diplomatic puzzles. By the 6th challenge, the human team had qualified for the finals, much to the shock of the galactic community. Only 10 teams had advanced this far. That evening, they gathered in their quarters to discuss the final challenge. The impossible course. We should be proud of making it this far, Dr. Grant said cautiously. No one expects a new species to even attempt the impossible course. Frank studied the holographic model of the asteroid field spinning above their table. Has anyone actually tried to understand why it's impossible? Lisa was already taking measurements with a device she had traded for earlier. The asteroids shift positions randomly. The energy fields disrupt navigation systems. And the gravity wells are unpredictable. So normal piloting won't work, Frank mused. Jeff Winters, a former stunt pilot who had joined them for the tournament, had been quiet until now. He leaned forward with a gleam in his eye. What if we don't fly it like a normal ship? What if we treat it more like... He paused, searching for words, like a mechanical bull. Everyone stared at him. You know, don't fight the motion. Go with it. Anticipate and flow. Frank's face slowly lit up with understanding. He reached for his drink. Jeff, he said, hold my beer. Across the room, an eternal observer who had been quietly monitoring the humans suddenly stiffened. It was happening again. These strange, short-lived creatures were about to do something terrifying. The human phrase, hold my beer, was quickly becoming the 3 most dreaded words in the galaxy. News spread quickly through the space station. The humans were going to attempt the impossible course. Aliens of all species gathered to watch what many believed would be a spectacular failure or worse. The human ship, a small vessel they had named the Daredevil, sat ready in the launch bay. It looked plain compared to the sleek crafts of other competitors, but Frank and his team had spent all night modifying it. Are you certain about these changes? Asked Zorix, who had been assigned as their official observer. He watched with concern as Lisa made final adjustments to the ship's thrusters. Nope, Lisa replied cheerfully, tightening a bolt. That's what makes it fun. Zorix blinked slowly, a gesture of deep confusion among his kind. I do not understand how uncertainty can be fun. Jeff Winters climbed out from beneath the ship's control panel. His hands were covered in grease and small burns. When you live less than 100 years, you learn to enjoy the surprises. The modifications they had made were unlike anything the tournament had seen before. Instead of strengthening the shields, the approach most species took, they had made the ship more responsive. They had disabled most of the automated systems, giving Jeff direct manual control. This goes against all safety protocols, Zorix observed. Exactly, Frank said with a grin. As the humans prepared to board their ship, a crowd of various aliens had gathered at a safe distance. Among them was an unusual sight, a group of Eternals huddled together, watching intently. It's rare to see so many Eternals in one place, Dr. Grant remarked quietly to Frank. They must be very interested in what we're doing. Frank nodded. Or they're waiting to see us crash and burn. The tournament announcer's voice boomed across the launch bay. The human team will now attempt the impossible course. As a reminder, no species has successfully completed this challenge in 12,000 years. As Frank and his team boarded their ship, a small delegation approached. It was Eliorix, accompanied by 3 other Eternals. We wish to observe from within your mission control, Eliorix stated formally. If you permit it. Frank exchanged glances with Dr. Grant, who would be staying behind to coordinate. Of course, he replied. Though I should warn you, our methods might seem chaotic. The Eternals followed Dr. Grant to the control room, maintaining a careful distance, as if wary of contamination by human unpredictability. Inside the Daredevil, Jeff took the pilot's seat, while Lisa manned the engineering station. Major Coleman and Frank handled navigation and tactics. All systems ready, Lisa reported, though I used the term ready very loosely. Communication check, came Dr. Grant's voice through the speakers. We hear you, Frank replied. How are our immortal friends doing? There was a pause before Dr. Grant answered. They're fascinated and possibly terrified. The launch sequence began. The Daredevil shot out from the station toward the swirling maze of asteroids and energy fields that made up the impossible course. In the control room, the Eternals watched with increasing alarm as Jeff piloted directly toward the asteroid field instead of taking the cautious approach path. What is he doing? Eliorix asked, his usual calm demeanor cracking. Dr. Grant tried to explain. Jeff's theory is to use the gravitational pulls to our advantage, like surfing waves. The ship entered the asteroid field at high speed. On the view screen, they could see Jeff weaving between massive rocks with only meters to spare. Instead of fighting against the gravitational pulls, he used them to slingshot the ship forward, gaining momentum. "This is madness," whispered an Eternal. In the ship, warning alarms blared constantly as they violated safety parameters. Lissa bypassed system after system as they overheated or threatened to shut down. "We're going too fast," Coleman called out as a massive asteroid loomed ahead. "Nah," Jeff replied calmly, spinning the ship in a tight corkscrew between two colliding rocks. "We're just getting started." Word of the humans' approach spread throughout the space station. Viewing screens everywhere showed the Daredevil's progress, deeper into the course than any ship had gone in millennia. Rick Peterson, a quantum physicist who had recently joined the human delegation, watched from the science lab with growing excitement. He was mapping the energy patterns as the ship progressed. "They're approaching the central zone," he announced to no one in particular. The Eternals in the control room had gone completely silent, their ancient eyes fixed on the screens with an expression rarely seen on their kind. Genuine awe mixed with horror. This was the real test of humanity's hold my beer philosophy, either brilliant innovation or spectacular destruction. Throughout the galaxy, beings held their breath as they watched. The central zone of the impossible course glowed with strange energies that no ship had successfully passed through in 12,000 years. On the main viewing screen of the station, the Daredevil looked tiny against the swirling chaos ahead. "Energy levels are off the charts," Rick Peterson reported from the science lab. He had connected his equipment to the ship's sensors and was getting readings that made no sense. "There's some kind of folded space in there." In the control room, Dr. Grant watched as the Eternals huddled together, their usually composed faces showing clear signs of distress. "Your team should turn back," Ileorix said. "They've already gone farther than any ship in thousands of years. That is victory enough." Dr. Grant smiled. "They won't turn back. It's not in our nature." Inside the Daredevil, warning lights flashed across every panel. The ship shuddered as waves of energy washed over it. Jeff's hands moved across the controls with amazing speed, adjusting for each new threat. "Shields down to 30%, Coleman called out. "Main power fluctuating," Lisa added, her fingers dancing across her engineering console. "Whatever's in that central zone is messing with our systems." Frank studied the sensor readings. "It's like the laws of physics are different in there." Jeff nodded, his eyes never leaving the view screen. "I can feel it. The ship wants to go in 6 directions at once." Lisa suddenly sat up straight. "Wait a minute. What if that's it? What if the reason no one can pass through is because they're trying to maintain normal space-time physics?" Frank looked at her. "What are you suggesting?" "Let's stop fighting it. If space is folded in there, let's fold with it." Lisa began rapidly rerouting power. "Jeff, when I give the word, cut all stabilizers." "Cut the stabilizers." Coleman looked shocked. "We'll be torn apart." "Maybe," Lisa said. "Or maybe we'll flow through the folds instead of fighting them." Frank considered for only a moment. "Do it." Back in the control room, alarms began to sound as the Daredevil systems reported multiple failures. "What's happening?" Ileorix demanded. Dr. Grant watched the readings with growing concern. They shut down the stabilizers. Voluntarily." The Eternals physically recoiled. One of them actually backed away toward the exit. On the screen, the Daredevil entered the central zone and immediately began to distort. The ship seemed to stretch and compress as if seen through rippling water. "We've lost sensor contact," a technician announced. For several long seconds, there was complete silence in the control room. Dr. Grant held her breath. The Eternals stood perfectly still, their ancient eyes fixed on the empty space where the ship had vanished. Then, unexpectedly, a communication channel crackled to life. "Control, this is the Daredevil." It was Frank's voice, breaking up but audible. "You are not going to believe what we're seeing." The entire station erupted in shocked exclamations. On the other side of the course, emerging from the central zone, the Daredevil reappeared. The ship was battered but intact. "They'd made it through," Dr. Grant whispered. In the science lab, Rick Peterson stared at his readings in disbelief. Impossible. They somehow navigated a 5-dimensional space using 3-dimensional controls. The Daredevil limped toward the finish line, its engine sputtering but still functioning. When it finally docked at the return bay, crowds had gathered to witness the impossible. The ship's hatch opened slowly. Jeff emerged first, his flight suit torn and his face sporting a new cut, but grinning widely. Lysa followed, looking exhausted but triumphant. Coleman came next, shaking his head as if still not believing what had happened. Finally, Frank stepped out, carrying a small glowing object. "We brought back a souvenir from the center," he announced, holding up what appeared to be a crystalline sphere that pulsed with inner light. Eliorix approached slowly, his tall frame seeming to tremble slightly. "No one has ever reached the heart of the course. It has been deemed theoretically impossible." Frank shrugged. "We just stopped thinking about what was impossible and focused on what might work." The story of the humans who conquered the impossible course spread throughout the galaxy at faster-than-light speed. Within days, the phrase "hold my beer" had been translated into over 5,000 alien languages. But the humans' adventure was far from over. The strange artifact they had brought back was about to change everything. The artifact from the center of the impossible course sat in a secure lab on the space station. It pulsed with soft blue light, casting strange shadows that seemed to move even when nothing else did. Scientists from dozens of species had gathered to study it, but no one could determine what it was or how it worked. "It defies all known laws of physics," a floating gaseous entity named Zertex announced after 3 days of tests. Rick Peterson, the human quantum physicist, studied the readings with growing excitement. He had been quietly running his own experiments while the other scientists argued about proper protocols. "Has anyone tried touching it?" Rick asked suddenly. The room fell silent. The alien scientists stared at him in horror. "Touch an unknown artifact from a region of space where physics itself breaks down." A crystalline Zendari scientist's voice crackled with alarm. "That would violate Safety Protocol 27B at minimum." Rick shrugged. "Sometimes you have to get hands-on with a problem." Before anyone could stop him, Rick reached out and placed his palm flat against the glowing crystal. The alien scientists scrambled backward, some fleeing the room entirely. Even the Eternals, who normally moved with dignified grace, backed away quickly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the artifact's glow intensified, and strange symbols appeared in the air around it. It's some kind of interface," Rick said, his eyes wide with wonder. "I can feel it communicating with me." Frank, Lisa, and Dr. Grant rushed into the lab, having been alerted by the commotion. They found Rick standing transfixed, his hand still on the crystal, while a safe distance away, alien scientists watched in fascination and fear. "Rick," Frank approached cautiously. "You okay, buddy?" Rick turned slowly, his eyes glowing with the same blue light as the artifact. "It's a key, Frank. A key to folded space. The beings who created the impossible course weren't testing navigation skills. They were looking for species ready to understand higher dimensions." The news spread quickly through the station. The Galactic Federation Council called an emergency meeting, with the human team invited as special guests. The Grand Council chamber was filled with representatives from hundreds of species, all buzzing with excitement and concern. Eliorix addressed the assembly. "For 12,000 years, we believed the impossible course was simply an ultimate test of skill. Now these humans, barely a century into space travel, have discovered its true purpose." Frank sat uncomfortably in a chair designed for a much taller being. He leaned over to whisper to Dr. Grant, "They're talking about us like we're not here." A tall, spindly alien rose to speak. We must proceed with caution. If this artifact is indeed a key to higher dimensional space, misuse could be catastrophic. Another delegate, a being composed of shifting metallic plates, added, such technology should be studied slowly, over centuries, by our most experienced scientists. Frank exchanged glances with his team. The aliens were proposing a careful, methodical approach that might take decades. Lisa leaned forward. With all due respect, we believe we can make progress much faster than that. A murmur ran through the chamber. A representative from a species of methane-breathing giants rumbled. Your species is known for recklessness. This technology requires patience. Rick, his eyes still faintly glowing from contact with the artifact, stood up. The artifact chose to communicate with humans precisely because of our approach. Our adaptability. The council erupted in debate. Some species argued for caution, others for progress, but all seemed wary of letting humans take the lead. As the arguments continued, a strange alarm began to sound throughout the station. The main view screen activated, showing a massive distortion in space near the station. The fold near the impossible course is expanding, announced a technician. It's destabilizing. Eliorix turned to the humans, genuine fear in his ancient eyes. This is unprecedented. The fold has been stable for millennia. All eyes in the chamber turned to the humans. Even the most cautious species seemed to realize that conventional approaches wouldn't work for an unconventional crisis. Frank stood up, looking at the growing spatial distortion on the screen. He turned to Rick. How confident are you that you understand what that artifact was telling you? Rick smiled nervously. About 60%. Frank nodded, then addressed the council. We have a plan, but you're probably not going to like it. Across the chamber, several Eternals visibly tensed, recognizing the look on the human's face. One of them actually whispered something that sounded suspiciously like "hold my beer" in perfect English. The humans were about to do something terrifying again. Frank's plan was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. They would take the Daredevil, with the artifact on board, back into the fold. Rick believed he could use the artifact to communicate with whatever intelligence had created the impossible course and stabilize the growing distortion. This is madness, Zorix protested as the humans prepared their ship. You barely survived the first journey. Now you want to enter an actively destabilizing fold. That's pretty much it, Lisa confirmed as she made rapid modifications to the ship's systems. She had recruited Hector Garcia, an engineer who specialized in creative repurposing of technology, to help with the upgrades. Hector was a stocky man with calloused hands who could turn almost anything into something useful. He had already converted parts of the alien space station's waste system into power boosters for the Daredevil. If we overcharge the main power coupling, we should be able to generate a field similar to what the artifact produces, Hector explained. Not as strong, but enough to keep us in one piece. Maybe. The word maybe made several nearby aliens wince. Sharon Williams, an unconventional physicist who had been rejected by mainstream academia on Earth, joined the team as well. She had theories about multidimensional space that most scientists had dismissed as impossible, until now. The fold isn't just a distortion, she explained while examining Rick's data. It's a doorway between dimensional layers. Something or someone opened it, and now it's becoming unstable. The Galactic Federation provided resources but made it clear that this mission was voluntary. No one would be ordered to enter the fold. To everyone's surprise, a young Eternal named Lyrics volunteered to join the human crew. My species has observed the universe for thousands of years, Lyrics explained when questioned by the Eternal Elders. But these humans explore it. I wish to understand their perspective. With the crew assembled, and the ship prepared as well as possible given the time constraints, the Daredevil prepared for launch. The station's viewing areas were packed with aliens watching the humans attempt another impossible task. The distortion has grown 17% since we first detected it, Coleman reported from the navigation station. At this rate, It will reach the station in less than 3 hours. Frank nodded. Then we better move fast. Jeff, are you ready? Jeff Winters settled into the pilot's seat, as ready as anyone can be to fly into a hole in reality. Let's do this. Dr. Grant watched from the control room with Eliorix and several other Eternals. They will succeed, she said confidently. How can you know this? Eliorix asked. Because they have to, she replied simply. Humans tend to perform best when there's no other option. The Daredevil launched, accelerating toward the swirling vortex of distorted space. As they approached, the sensors went wild, reporting impossible physics and contradictory readings. The fold is much more unstable than before, Sharon reported, studying the data. The boundaries between dimensions are breaking down. On the bridge, Rick sat with the artifact in his lap. It glowed brighter as they got closer to the fold, almost pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. I think it's responding to me, he said. It's trying to communicate something. Jeff guided the ship closer to the edge of the distortion. Entering the fold in 30 seconds, hold on to something. Lisa and Hector worked frantically in the engine room, rerouting power and attempting to strengthen their makeshift dimensional field. Sparks flew as systems overloaded, but they kept working. This is crazy, Hector muttered as he reconnected a smoking wire. I love it. The ship began to shake violently as they entered the outer layer of the fold. Alarms blared throughout the vessel. Hull integrity failing, Coleman called out. Shields at 20% and dropping. Frank looked at Rick. Whatever you're going to do with that artifact, now would be a good time. Rick nodded and placed both hands on the crystal. It erupted in brilliant blue light that filled the bridge. Strange symbols appeared around him, floating in the air. I understand now, Rick whispered, his eyes reflecting the light of 1,000 stars. It's not just a key. It's a map. The ship plunged deeper into the fold, vanishing from the station's sensors. In the control room, Dr. Grant and the Eternals watched in silence as the communication signal flatlined. For 1 minute, then 2, there was no sign of the Daredevil or its crew. The distortion continued to grow. Then, just as Eliorix was about to speak, a new signal appeared on the edge of the distortion. The Daredevil emerged, trailing energy like a comet, its hull scared but intact. And behind it, the fold began to close. The Daredevil docked at the station amid cheers and gasps from the gathered aliens. The hull of the ship glowed with strange energies, patterns swirling across its surface like living tattoos. When the hatch finally opened, Frank emerged first, helping a dazed Rick Peterson. The rest of the crew followed, looking exhausted but triumphant. Most surprising was the young Eternal, Lyrix, whose silver eyes now had flecks of blue in them, the same blue as the artifact. What happened in there? Eliorix asked as medical teams checked the crew. Frank looked at Rick, who was still clutching the artifact. You want to explain, or should I? Rick smiled weakly. We met them. The builders. The ones who created the impossible course. A hush fell over the crowd. Even the oldest Eternals leaned forward with interest. They exist in the space between dimensions, Rick continued. They've been watching the galaxy for millions of years, waiting for species ready to understand higher dimensional physics. The artifact wasn't just a key, Sharon Williams added. It was an invitation. But the fold was destabilizing because too many races had tried to force their way through over the millennia without understanding. So we talked to them, a skeptical alien asked. Not exactly talked, Rick said, but we communicated. They recognized our approach as different. We didn't try to overcome the physics of the fold. We adapted to it. In the days that followed, the human crew shared what they had learned with the Galactic Federation. The builders had shared knowledge that would change galactic civilization forever. New forms of energy, travel between dimensions, and understanding of the universe's structure that even the Eternals had never imagined. A month after the incident, the Galactic Federation Council called a special session. The grand chamber was filled beyond capacity as representatives from every world gathered to hear the announcement. For countless millennia, our Federation has grown slowly, cautiously, with measured steps. Immortals began. Today, we recognize that there are times when a different approach is needed. He gestured to where Frank and his team stood. The humans have shown us that sometimes improvisation and bold action are necessary. Therefore, we are establishing a new protocol for crises that defy conventional solutions. Zorik stepped forward, holding a ceremonial document. From this day forward, when standard procedures fail, when careful planning proves inadequate, the Federation will invoke what we are calling the Hold My Beer Protocol. Murmurs and chuckles spread through the chamber. Frank couldn't help but smile. Under this protocol, Zorix continued, a human team will be granted extraordinary authority to address the situation using their unique methods. The council erupted in applause, though Frank noticed some species looked distinctly nervous about the idea. After the ceremony, Lyrics approached Frank. The young Eternal had changed dramatically since their journey into the fold. The normally reserved being now spoke with excitement and moved with a spring in his step. I wish to join your crew permanently, Lyrics announced. My people live too cautiously, observing but never experiencing. In one journey with humans, I learned more than in my previous 300 years. Frank laughed. Welcome aboard. Though I should warn you, things tend to get weird around us. I am counting on it, Lyrics replied with a smile. 6 months later, a new ship was commissioned. Larger than the Daredevil and incorporating both human ingenuity and alien technology, it was christened the Beer Holder. Its mission: to explore the boundaries between dimensions that the builders had revealed. As the crew prepared for their first official mission, alarms suddenly blared throughout the station. A massive space anomaly, unlike anything ever recorded, appeared near a densely populated system. The Federation Emergency Council convened immediately. After assessing the situation, the eldest Eternal, Eliorix, rose slowly from his seat. For the first time in his 5,000-year life, he spoke the words that once made his kind duck for cover. Activate the Hold My Beer Protocol, he said solemnly. We need the humans. Across the room, Frank Rogers grinned as he received the call. Some problems required careful planning and caution. Others needed someone crazy enough to try the impossible. Time to go to work, he told his crew, and as the Immortals braced themselves for whatever insanity would follow, humanity prepared to do what they did best, the impossible.